Pardon me while I have a strange interlude. There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art. On the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. And this week's show is brought to you by Van Helsing brand Dracula detectors. If you need Dracula detection, if you're worried about Dracula's descending on your house, it's good to have the old Van Helsing model Dracula detector handy. It comes with a few parts that, or you can send away for extra parts to help you detect whether there's Frankensteins or mummies in your area as well. But it will definitely keep you abreast of any Draculas in your immediate area. So if that is a concern of yours and you don't like the smell of garlic, look into Van Helsing brand Dracula detectors. And on tonight's show, we have someone that I became aware of recently. He is the founder of Dripless Times Media, a writer and editor by trade, and he has a lot of interesting ideas on his site and on his Substack, which I highly recommend reading. And I've been sharing around some articles on the socials because I think they're pretty darn cool. Please welcome to the show, Walker Yarrow.
Thank you, AP. It's a delight to be here. Thank you for the kind words. I've been looking forward to this since you reached out to me over the weekend. And I just have to say quick, I love it. Anytime anybody uses Dracula as to describe vampires in general. So I need to pick me up some of those Dracula detectors.
Yeah, well, I like Dracula as a plural term. So that I love that.
There's like something just inherently comedic about it that it tickles me every time I hear it. So this is already off to a great start.
All right, great. That's good to know. I have often said that's the only way I would get back into music is if I could start a band called the Space Draculas.
That brings up an interesting question, like what planet do Draculas reside on? And do they all dress and look like Dracula?
It is. I mean, it raises all kinds of questions, and I think that kind of mystique would draw people in to the show when you're playing somewhere. So it would be good. That was inspired by a report I read at one point from Transylvania, some battle that was happening in like the 500s or something, and there was some wonder in the sky that was seen, and I was like, it was Space Draculas, and that was kind of the joke.
That would be wonderful. It is like crypto terrestrials, the whole UFO phenomena, but it's actually Draculas, an underground enclave of Draculas manipulating humanity. Yeah. I could get behind
crypto terrestrial Draculas. There we go.
It.
We're breaking new ground right now.
It's perfect. We're making history already.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of inspired to do the Draculas bit just because there actually are some vampire legends close to where you are that you've written a bit about. You're in the Wisconsin area, right? So
correct.
And around Halloween, you posted something about the Mineral Point vampire. I thought was really kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you first, just out of curiosity, because I'm always wondering how far this story has traveled outside of Wisconsin. How aware were you of the Mineral Point vampire before kind of reading that?
I was completely unaware. That was what was really cool about it. As I was like, I got the sense that you were kind of like, well, this is a well trodden path. This tale has been told many times, and I'm like, well, it's news to me. Like, lay it on me, man.
Good.
Because
Yeah,
we have New
it's
England vampires here, but it's more of a historical thing that has to do with historical hysterias. You
mhm,
know, like the Rhode Island Exeter vampire, or like the ones in Vermont,
mhm.
and the Jewett City ones in Connecticut. But yeah, this was a really interesting kind of urban legend, folklorish sort of tale. So it was really cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the only reason it really gets described as a vampire is because the guy who first sees it describes it as wearing like a cloak or a cape, and then all the local townsfolk start dressing as Dracula, essentially to mock him and go around to the bars. So it just
Uh,
from there it becomes the Mineral Point vampire. But yeah, let me get into the story of it. So kind of as you alluded to, it's a pretty common bit of folklore around my area. I think I first heard it back in the second grade. But even I remember like we had a kid who moved from Mineral Point told us the story. But even I remember when he told it to us, I was like, I like know this for summer like this. I've heard this story before, so I think it's fairly popular around here, at least in the 80s, 90s. So it took place March 30th, 1981, Mineral Point, Wisconsin. Officer John Pepper was on a routine patrol of Graceland Cemetery, which I believe at the time had some vandalism taking place at it. So he was just doing his job, shining his flashlight through the bars of the cemetery fence, and he sees some guy just standing in the cemetery. And he gets in, he's like ready to apprehend this vandal, but as he gets closer, he realizes this man, this creature, this whatever it is incredibly tall. Pepper himself is over 6 feet, and this thing's taller than him. He describes it, like I said, as wearing like a cape or a cloak. It's super pale, and as soon as it sees him, it just takes off running. And Pepper says that it's just navigating the cemetery with ease. Because you got to remember, this takes place at night. There's no lights in that cemetery.
right,
It's pretty dark. You would think you're going to trip on a tombstone, but this thing is just running around without any care in the world. And Pepper is like, I'm an athletic guy, and I could not keep up with whatever this was. And the kicker is, it reaches this 4 foot fence, barbed wire 4 foot fence, they say. And the legend is it leaps it in a single bound and runs off into the Wisconsin countryside, never to be seen again until the late or the early 2000s, if you believe those stories.
right. Yeah, and then you kind of get into unpacking that, and I mean, um, can leave it. You know, we can leave some things unexplained here for people to dig into, because
Mhm.
I feel like this is a kind of thing that you see with a lot of paranormal stories, where there's myth making and legend stuff, and you know, modern folklore,
Mhm.
where you have almost copycat things going on, like you said, people dressing up like Dracula just to make fun of the guy, or you know, 20 years later somebody else claims the same thing, and then those details are really hard to verify when you go back to look at it. um,
Mhm.
you can almost understand why a lot of people think that all of the paranormal and every weird story is just nonsense and not worth dealing with, because it's so hard to unpack.
No, and this is like the perfect example of that because when I went into it, like I didn't really want to even cover it when I first started. It was like something I felt almost like obliged to just
Right.
because I had heard about it. It's pretty close to where I am. Like Mineral Point's only like an hour and a half drive from me. So like I could go like see where this took place. So it's like, well, it's more than likely a prank. The officer who supposedly saw it, it's claimed he was a prankster, like to run around town in a gorilla suit. So it's like, well, this is going to be like an easy one to cover. That's why I approached it from the standpoint of, or I was going to approach it from the standpoint of movies, because the 70s were like full just vampire media, like more
Oh
vampire
yeah.
media than you could shake a stick at. So I was like, well, that's an interesting angle to look at this folklore from, because we could, do like a co-creation-y thing, or maybe this guy was just inspired by all these movies. But the more you dig into the actual story, it's like once you lay out all the facts and can find what you can find on it, it's like you can make a compelling case that it was either a hoax or something actually strange happened to this guy. It's really interesting. At the end of it, it's totally up to kind of your opinion reading through it, as whether you believe somebody pranked this guy, he did a hoax himself, or this was truly a strange event that took place.
Yeah, and I mean, it can be a combination of all of those things, and
Mm-hmm.
it is funny because looking into any kind of paranormal case, I feel like those are generally your options up front. Is was this real or fake? And then you do a bunch of digging and you pull on all the different threads, and at the end of it, you're like, well, it's either real or fake. Don't know, but here's all this evidence I found. It's
Yeah,
like,
right. It's intriguing. It keeps the mystery going, and like what compels me to like keep digging for it. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like, well, great. It either
yeah,
happened or it didn't. So somehow I did all this research and work and wound up right back at square one.
right. But it's a lot of fun getting there. Like little details, like a policeman running around town in a gorilla suit, is hilarious to me because I have not known very many policemen with a sense of humor, and that's that sounds really really kind of refreshing to have one that just puts on. Because I mean, that's one of my bigger regrets in life is I have yet to own my own gorilla suit. I feel like I really should have by this point gotten one, but
Mhm.
I
It's
still
something
don't.
everybody should own once at
Yeah,
least in their life.
yeah, I would think so too. But alas, I am still failing at that. But but yeah, so I mean, I guess this is a good segue into your interest in all of this. You mentioned that you probably heard this story in the second grade and felt like you had already heard it at that point. Were you always interested in like paranormal stuff and monsters and weirdness? Is that pretty much like since childhood for you?
Yeah, it really is as far back as I can remember, and I can't put my finger on what kind of sparked that interest in these subjects. Um, I would, maybe the romantic thing to say is I've always been kind of a writer and storyteller at heart, so there's like kind of natural overlap with like the folklore, odd history, paranormal stories. If you want to go like the kind of interesting in its own way psychology route, I am an October baby. So all my earliest happy birthday memories would involve ghosts and goblins and trick or treating and stuff. So just reinforce that goodwill over the years. But yeah, this stuff has always kind of intrigued me, and seeing an opportunity to combine the the professional skill set from working in journalism and publishing and stuff while getting to cover these things has been a real joy. Like you said, just digging into newspaper archives and kind of putting dots together. I never thought I'd enjoy an evening of sifting through just newspaper archives, but it's a lot more fun than I thought it would be.
Oh, I'm a big fan. Do you get the old microfilm readers out sometimes at the library?
I haven't had to do that yet.
Oh man,
Um, I've been able to get
you're missing
everything.
out.
I know someday, but right now my trusty library card and their archives online are making the way. But sooner or later, I'm gonna have to go old school.
Yeah, yeah. Ooh, la di da, Mr. Fancy Pants with the online archives. Uh, yeah, no, my local library has like their town paper on microfilm still. It's not never been digitized. So if I want to find
Nice.
something, I go in there and they'll set it up for you, and then you can have it on the computer screen and clip it. But I'm so spoiled on things like newspapers.com that I did a ton of
Hmm.
research at one point using microfilm and clipping articles and then failed to include the date of those articles. So now it's like I have to go back and find them all again so that I can properly cite them if I ever want to use them.
I've fallen into that same trap. I think I bookmarked something or like made a note
Yeah,
of it, only to go back and find that I didn't save that note or the bookmark didn't get saved, and now I'm just frantically googling trying to remember what string of keywords got me to this information, and it never works. It's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
terrible.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like with newspapers.com, if you use that, it's going to automatically tell you the publication of the date. So
Hmm.
that spoiled me because that is not the case when you clip something from an image on the screen. So
Yeah.
yeah, but um, but yeah, I mean, that is one thing that struck me, and I kind of had to ask you ahead of recording is like, oh, you have a background in writing, don't you? Because uh, not to be dismissive or mean to people in this field, but there's a lot of them that aren't great writers. I mean, then this has always been true. Like you look back at like contactees writing their own accounts and stuff like that, even though a lot of that was ghostwritten or people writing their own books on the subject. Like there's a lot of very amateur writing out there. And then when I was reading yours, I'm like, oh, this is refreshing. This guy really like this seems like professional writing on this, and somebody taking these subjects seriously with kind of nuance, which is something I don't see all the time. So that's really kind of cool. So
Well,
I
thank you.
applaud you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Uh,
appreciate you saying that. I thank you very much. Yeah, I got my start in newspapers, all things. Speaking of community journalism, so my heart lies in newspaper writing, but I was in B2B publishing for 5 years. At the tail end of that bit of my career, I was the lead editor of an aircraft maintenance brand. So, B2B publishing, it's like sort of journalism, but it's not, you know, as great of journalism as like the New York Times or something.
right.
But still very writing, content creation focused. Like I was telling you on the chat before we started recording, this is my first time I think being on the other end of the interview microphone and
Yeah.
being interviewed. So this is a lot of fun. But no, yeah, my I've been lucky enough to make a career out of writing. I don't know how many of my other writer classmates out there can say the same. I really just kind of lucked into it. The newspaper took a flyer on some kid with an English degree, and I was able to spiral that into so far, fingers crossed, a decent career. But yeah, my heart's always lied in fiction writing, and the nonfiction stuff just pays the bills.
Yeah. Well, I mean, uh, writing about the paranormal is kind of great because you can do a little bit of both, really. Uh, I mean, it's not quite fiction, but as you mentioned with like the vampire story, like it kind of borders on urban legend or folklore or a hoax, which that kind of all blends with fiction well. Or, and this is entirely likely in my mind, something actually happened that night,
Hmm.
and even if that one part of it is true and everything else that spirals off of it is false, it's kind of like this interesting juxtaposition between reality and unreality. And I think somewhere in the middle of that is where a lot of this phenomena um, really lives and is really active.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I always take the kind of X Files Mulder approach of like I want to believe every story.
Yeah,
Like when I went into the Mineral Point Vampire one, I got to those kind of 2000 stories and trying to find out the details on those. And like I don't set out to debunk anything, but I'm just trying to present the information as it is. And sometimes, yeah, you'll wind up like, oh, there's no actual source for these stories that I can find. Um, but back to your kind of original point, like, yeah, that's the great thing about these kind of topics is that they have one foot in reality and then one foot in whatever you want to call the other unreality, just myth making. And those are really the
yeah,
two components of any good story is like something based enough in reality for people to to engage with, but then enough ambiguity for them to put their own spin on it and interpretation. So yeah, they're naturally just compelling from like the human brain storytelling what it likes.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that's why we all like these stories too.
Hmm.
It's the story itself is very important, and that's why like I don't begrudge hoaxers and or even people that embellish tales or leave out like the information that shines doubt on the story,
Hmm.
because yeah, I mean, you need a little bit of hucksterism to make the thing flow. I think that
Oh yeah.
not and um, it's just so interesting to pick it all apart and look at it from different angles. But I feel like there's a little bit of everything in this field, and it's really fun to to pick it apart.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
let's see. You were worried about rambling before, and I'm trailing off right now with a bad thought.
no, no, no. Don't worry. I can just let me go. I'll start rambling if
Yeah.
you want rambling.
Okay. Yeah.
No, it's definitely it's interesting, especially when you come to the hoaxer thing and the mineral point vampire, because like I said, there is I want to believe that this wasn't a prank. It wasn't a hoax by John Pepper, that this was a truly strange event. Whatever it was, be it actual vampire or I don't know, whatever else, some ghoul or goblin of some sort was actually in that cemetery doing something. But if you said Walker, would you bet all the money in your bank account that this was an actual vampire? It's like I no, I can't say
Yeah.
that. I can't do that. I can't take that leap of faith, but
Right.
I very much want it to be.
Yeah. And how would you ever prove it? I mean, unless you have a time
Hmm.
machine and you can go back and look, you can't. And like the thing is that I feel like this is less vampire-ish to me than it reminds me of like Spring Hill Jack.
Oh yeah.
Um, and closer to home for me, there was one in Provincetown, Massachusetts, in I think the 1940s. It was called the Provincetown Phantom, and he was seen a bunch of times. But it's the leaping over the fence thing. Like, it just seems like a superhuman feat, So that's yeah,
Yeah, and it's interesting how kind of often that pops up.
yeah,
Um, that was another angle I was going to explore because obviously you have like the most famous one in like Spring Hill Jack and stuff. But even Wisconsin has its own, like just weird ghost guy. He's called the Ridgeway Ghost, and it actually existed like not far away from Mineral Point. Ridgeway was like an old kind of trading route that got eventually dried up as the industry changed and things and mining moved out of the area. But there's all this folklore about this ghost, and it's one of those ghosts that's not like a singular ghost. There's like a story about um, this butcher encountering ghost pigs that grow bigger as they get to him, and that's classified as like
wow,
the Ridgeway ghost swines. So you have this like built-in kind of entity or folklore, whatever you want to call it, in that region. But then flash forward to the 80s and somebody encounters what, 100 years ago would have been called the Ridgeway Ghost, and it becomes the Mineral Point Vampire.
wow, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, the ghost pigs in particular really freaked me out, but
It's a fun story. I was in preparation of this. I was flipping through this book called Wisconsin Lore, just a huge collection of all different folklore from Wisconsin. And yeah, he essentially was coming home from like a butchering job, and he saw some pigs ahead of him. He was like, "Oh, whatever, loose pigs." But they kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they got like the size of cows. And apparently, he gets close enough to him, he hits them with his butchering knife, and then they
yeah,
disappear. And he's like, "Oh no, that was the Ridgeway Ghost swines." And he goes home, and apparently dies of fright like a few days later.
wow,
Yeah,
wow, yeah. I love a good animal ghost story, and that one is that's exceptional even for animal ghosts.
yeah. That's one of the more fun ones. I mean, not that some guy died of fright supposedly a few days after it, but the fact that they're enlarging pigs is pretty great.
Yeah, growing pigs.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of precedent for that. Um, because I mean, one of my favorite ghost stories ever is of the Phantom Chicken of Highgate Cemetery,
Oh, I don't know
or
if I know this.
Pond Square, actually, in London. Have you never heard of this one?
No, I don't think I have.
Oh, um, it's the story of Sir Francis Bacon was trying to prove that food could be preserved with cold temperature, because this is in an era before people knew that. And to prove it, he killed the chicken and plucked all its feathers and stuffed it in a snowbank, so that to prove that it wouldn't decay at all in
Hmm.
that in the time that it was left there. And then later he died, I think, either from salmonella or from being out in the cold, like a bronchial infection. But the chicken was said to haunt that area. So every once in a while, people would see like a spectral chicken with uh, like a broken neck and like a bunch of feathers missing, like running around. And it would like run around and cluck a bit and then disappear, like vanish before their eyes. So
That's awesome.
yeah, the phantom chicken. I love that. So um, yeah. So phantom pigs, Ridgeway Ghosts pigs. So was the Ridgeway Ghost supposed to be like a local farmer? Or do they have like a historical antecedent, or was that all
I
just legend?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's one of those that there's a whole bunch of different origin stories for it. The one I remember the most involves, um, let me try and get this straight in my head. Essentially, back in the day, the area was big in mining. I want to say lead and zinc mining.
Okay.
Um, and all the miners were having like a rowdy kind of party in the tavern. And two boys walk in, and they're coming out of the cold, and they're just looking for a place to warm up, get some food, get some drink. And they accidentally sit in like the biggest, baddest guy's chair. Like he's left to go take a whiz or something,
Uh,
and the other guys at the poker table are like, "Oh yeah, you can sit here," like thinking it's gonna be a funny prank. But he comes back and he gets real violent real fast. Supposedly, he throws one of the boys into the fire, and he beats the other boy when he tries to help him and casts him out into the snow. I think the other boy finally like claws his way out of the fire, and also like runs out into this snowstorm. Um, and their bodies are found like a few days later, maybe even come springtime, in by like a nearby river, and that is supposed
okay.
to be one of the origin stories of the ghost. But I'm having a hard time remembering that one because I actually heard that at a Halloween event at the Historical Society
Huh.
as like the origin. So that was they told that one in person. So I'm a little foggy on all the exact details of it, but I'm trying to remember out of the Wisconsin lore book. I don't think they give an origin for the ghost because he's not like a singular ghost. Like sometimes people see like a will o' the wisp thing, and that gets attributed to the Ridgeway ghost. It's one of those where if something spooky happened along this road, they were just like, "Oh, it's the Ridgeway ghost." Be it
Huh.
ghost pig, um, ball of light, or sometimes it is like a guy like chasing somebody off.
Uh, so does it have any of the attendant legends, like if you slow down and turn your headlights off for a couple seconds, it'll appear or anything like that?
No, most of the people really went out of their way to avoid it. And
Okay.
the one thing about it is that it was known kind of for prankish stuff, which is why I'm a little suspicious of the kind of the violent origin story that I told of the
Yeah.
ghost. Because one of my favorite stories of it involves poker again, but all these guys playing poker, and then suddenly all the playing cards and stuff start floating around the room, and then they look, and there's just kind of like a phantom apparition sitting there at the table, and they're like, "It's the Ridgeway Ghost," and they all rush out. So it usually did kind of like harmless prank stuff like that, would like come up along your horses and freak them out, so it'd make your carriage go super fast or whatnot.
Huh.
Um, yeah, even the swine thing, they didn't try and like hurt the guy. You could even make the case he was kind of the jerk in the situation because he just tried to cut a couple of really big pigs. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's more kind of like a lighthearted, pranksterish entity that just freaks people out more than something like, you would think if it's the spirit of some poor kid burnt alive, he'd be a little more pissed off.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, especially, I always feel that way with ghosts in general, where there's a lot of people that want to come in and go over how they died with them, like 100 other ghost hunters already did. Like,
Hmm.
wouldn't you get really sick of, as a ghost, having to answer all those questions? Um,
Yeah. Like, man,
I,
like,
I think I would rather have a ghost with a sense of humor. Um,
hmm.
but what's funny to a ghost may not be funny to us. Uh, and that's assuming it is a ghost too. And I think uh, I picked this up a little bit in. I don't know that you address this directly in some of the stuff you wrote, but the underlying assumptions. There's a lot of built-in assumptions in these stories and tales that
Hmm.
we're told, and they can be kind of limiting. Um, in how we look at it. So I mean, if you say ghost, I mean, even I'm doing it. Well, like, is there a story? Like, is there a guy that the ghost is based on? And but there's a range of phenomena, so probably not, right? But that tends to be how this stuff is approached.
Yeah, that's one of the things, kind of that journalist side that drives me in looking into these stories is trying to get to the as close to like the origination or the source of them that I can. Because especially in something like the Mineral Point Vampire, like the source for some of these stories is like it's a blog that cites a blog, and that blog cites another blog, and that blog cites a listicle, and that listicle, well, it cites another blog, and it's like, well, the
Yeah,
police were apparently involved. Like there has to be a report, right? Like where did this
yeah,
come from? So yeah, it's getting to the bottom of some of these things, and then yeah, going into the actual like what was the thing that was seen is even
yeah,
more interesting to start speculating. Like, can you put it in some box, a ghost or a vampire, and should you even do that? I mean, I don't think there's probably a right or wrong answer, but I like to be as kind of open minded and, like I said, I want to believe as possible when it comes to these things.
yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for letting the story speak for itself.
Hmm.
And one thing that I've often done is thrown out like the wackiest possible speculation, um, kind of as a joke. But then I find that upon revisiting it, I'm like, that's not the stupidest thing I could have said. That's actually pretty interesting. So, I think
No,
it's worthwhile to go way out there sometimes. But
that's the best way to do it. I had a professor in college who encouraged like go out on a limb. I
yeah,
would rather you go out on a limb and be able to like connect your crazy ideas that probably aren't, anywhere remotely, close or accurate or the way other people would think than just stick to the easy kind of mundane explanation for something. Even going back earlier in the conversation, you said the different ways you can kind of look at this stuff. And that's one of the kind of endlessly fun things to me is that just the different lenses you can apply to these topics. Like I love movie guy, film nerd, hell bent on never making money in my life. I minored in film theory in college. So I like to apply kind of film theory, film philosophy to the phenomena just as a different way to look at and examine it and maybe understand it. Again, might not get you any closer to the truth, but if, like I said before, half of these things have their foot in reality, half of them have their foot in folklore and just the natural elements of mystery and storytelling, like movies as a like almost a perfect narrative medium are like a great way to look at them.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that's something that I'm always kind of hinting at the way I've approached stuff, especially with this show, because I'm doing one one interview style one and then one movie one seems to be the pattern that I've developed with this show. So I will have to have you back for a third time's a charm episode if you want to pick a third movie in a franchise that we could talk about. But
Oh,
we'll
I
talk
I
about we'll
I
talk
would
about
love
it.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause I didn't catch the film buff part of it, but yeah, I mean, we could set that up, but yeah, I mean, it gets to kind of like the phenomena element of it and the element of it, which is just kind of like the imaginal realm of it,
Hmm.
the what those symbols are and what they mean, what the meaning is. Um, and there's a meaning apart from it, and there's a meaning that can be taken away from
Hmm.
the act of storytelling that can then fracture off into a million different directions. And in the end, it's all equally real because it's meaningful and it has real life effects. You know, it seems like splitting hairs to say something isn't real if it has a profound effect on somebody's life, for instance, or changes the course of history. So
Yeah, 100%. I can't agree with you more. Even going back to like the hoaxing stuff, it's like if it was a hoax, but it had impact on people, and someone took something meaningful away from it, like does it matter that it wasn't, actually what the person thought it was? As long as they don't go, do something bad with that information, start a cult or something. But as long as it has like a
yeah,
positive impact on them, yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what box you put this stuff in, or again, if it was even what the witness actually thought it was.
yeah. I mean, I think the ultimate reality, to get a bit metaphysical about it, is defies our human categorization. So and it will actively defy it. So there's no real point. Um, other
Yeah,
than that, just seems to be how we process reality. You know?
yeah, I've that's what's really been um kind of driving my interest ever since I got back into this stuff, kind of passionately, because like I said, I've been into it since I was a kid. But for a long time, I just got bored with it because it was just all, like flesh and blood, nuts and bolts stuff. And I was like, I've been hearing about Roswell and people hunting Bigfoot and EVPs for so long. It's like none of this is interesting, and all I care about at the end of the day is like a fun idea. If the idea is fun to me, I run with it,
Right?
even if it's completely ludicrous.
Yeah.
But thankfully, over COVID, I kind of stumbled into podcasts, kind of like yours, exploring these things from interesting different angles. Rediscovered, kind of my love for the subject through some of the things I read early as a kid, like Keel and Fort and stuff, and coming back to as an adult and really being able to digest these ideas and see like, oh, there are people talking about this stuff in like a fun, interesting, metaphysical way that isn't. I wonder how the Martians fine tune their propulsion system before they come here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's absurdly darkly funny when you think about people that obsess over those little details in
Hmm.
from that kind of strictly rationalist materialist perspective, because I always get the sense that people are trying to force something absurd into a scientific box, and they want credibility and they want to be credited for being scientific in their approach when really they're anything but. They're just you know, even when they try real hard, I mean, you have to have a sense of humor about this stuff. And I think that the phenomena, whatever it is, whatever specific one you're talking about, is I think humor is part of the propulsion, if you will.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
um, my my family and I have had like just like these odd experiences that my dad essentially will say like, oh, that's just the universe or something reminding you like not to take any of this seriously. Like, I think not to speak for him because I don't want to like I didn't ask him if I can share any crazy stories, but
right,
um, one recent thing happened to him. He was just having like a conversation with a friend. He was telling me, and one of their glasses just like slid across the table like a coffee cup, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's just the universe reminding us like don't take this too seriously, man. Like just kind of have fun with it, go with the flow, don't get too bogged down."
right. Right. And I mean, I think if you get scared, I think whatever it is plays with that. So it's
Hmm.
almost like you curate your own experience. I do feel bad saying that sometimes because I realize a lot of people have traumatic experiences that there probably is no way around. But like they're scary no matter how you look at it. But uh but yeah, I mean I think perception plays a lot into it, and the way we talk about this stuff also does, because I think there's a lot of fear mongering in the paranormal world, which begets that kind of suffering, um, which is unfortunate. But to the point I was making before, I think the first one that I read on your website was the hyper normalization of the paranormal in mass media, um, and I found that to be like, well, first of all, it was pretty long. I didn't expect it to be as long as it was, but I was like, "Oh, wow. All right, this is in depth." And I'm like, "Well, I I w I don't like to read things that are too long on my phone," and I was already reading it. I'm like, "Well, I'm in for it." So I read the whole thing, and I'm like, I thought that was a really cool way of looking at it, because I think I would classically refer to that as people taking themselves too seriously, or just kind of stagnation in a lot of these
Hmm.
fields. But the way you framed it around hypernormalization was actually like uh, a cool kind of cultural take on it. I don't know if you want to kind of unpack that one a little bit. Um,
Yeah, that's one of those like I was saying, this is just kind of like a fun idea and I'm going to run with it.
right.
I should note I'm not beholden to anything, and I'll be the first one to admit I don't know what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to something as complex as like the idea like hyper normalization. But I'll do my best to explain it in a nutshell here. Essentially, the idea was first proposed or described by a Russian scholar of history, describing kind of the cultural condition at the end of the Soviet Union. So, like right before the collapse, and um, there's like a great quote by I can't think of his name. The British documentarian. He did his own documentary that's also very long. It's 3 hours long. You can find it on YouTube though. Same name, hypernormalization. But he has
Yeah.
this quote describing it where it's like everybody knew everything was broken, and everybody knew nothing was working, and everybody knew everything. Like everybody knew that everybody else knew it, from everybody running society down to the people, just everyday workers. But like nobody could imagine an alternative to it. And I think the when we look at that in the kind of paranormal sense, I think the imagine is like the critical word there, because I've been on
Right.
this kind of kick on the Substack, kind of parsing out ideas from this longer essay into more digestible bites, where it just comes down to like there are these boundaries, um, kind of we have in society and then in ourselves, but this really looks like you can use it to kind of push yourself kind of out of that boundary. Like going back to the if the coffee cup slides itself across the table, um, what do you make of that? That just defied like a whole lot of things that, most people would say are impossible. So like, even though it's a minute thing, it's kind of a boundary breaking event.
Right.
Um, so I think that either on purpose or just by kind of like the natural way of these stories and these events is um is a positive maybe thing we should take away from it, is that ability to kind of break out and have and like force you by way of it happening to imagine an alternative out of this essentially just like feedback loop ingrained status quo.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it gets right back to what we were talking about like whether or not the story is true.
Hmm.
Um, the myriad effects it has are quantifiable and real, you know. So,
Yeah.
um, so imagination is incredibly important, because I think a lot of this stuff inspires people toward things like invention. I mean, that's the whole. It, I have sometimes said. the function of these mysterious things is to be mysterious,
Hmm.
and that's it. Like, because when you sit there and you try to figure it out, you become inventive and you find new ways to look at the world. Um, and I don't think progress really happens without that. So
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting. I was thinking about this in kind of preparation for our conversation tonight, and I went back to just kind of like some of the folklore roots of Wisconsin, because I was in anticipation of talking about hypernormalization. I was like, how do I talk about this without just like one sounding insane and two making sense? And
we're all mad here. You don't have to worry about that.
okay, that's good. I'm glad I'm in good company. But I went back to like some of the lumberjack folklore from Wisconsin, because these guys were working in winter. That's when they'd go out to cut all the trees down in Wisconsin, and
Yeah.
they kind of quite literally, like, if there was a tree in the state that could be turned into lumber used to build a house or whatnot, they cut it down. They essentially cleared cut all of Wisconsin, and they
Huh.
have all of this folklore. I mean, Paul Bunyan's the most well-known one, but there's all these different animals they'll claim to see and stuff. And I think that's like a good example of the of kind of what I'm talking about in the essay. Is are these guys, freezing cold around a fire at night, talking about these mythical elements and these creatures that never actually existed, but they're claiming to see in things. And it's like, if Paul Bunyan can be out there somewhere fighting a whatever, a hodag, we can cut down this tree. We can put up with the winter, and we can do this work, and it's
Right.
rough, but somewhere out there is something um more fantastical and greater than myself. So in comparison, cutting a tree down really isn't that hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those must have been some hardy folk that were out there cutting those trees
Yes, far more manly than myself.
down. Uh, it's funny too because I think I see a lot of the what did they call them? The fearsome critters. Is that the name that the lumberjacks used for their kind of, yeah.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. You see those pop up sometimes, like alongside cryptids, and people just kind of lump them in.
Hmm.
Um, and like I don't particularly take issue with it, but there is kind of a difference between the stories that lumberjacks told and things that, like a Bigfoot that somebody caught on film. They're
Yeah, they're their own interesting classification of thing,
right,
like a hoop snake and stuff.
right, yeah. I mean, I remember reading about one that basically looked like a walking coffin. It was like an oblong box with legs. It's like bizarre. They're a lot of fun, but
Hmm.
it is kind of funny how they get rediscovered and put out there in the form of art or like stickers or graphics and like lumped in with cryptozoological specimens. But and Paul Bunyan's an interesting thing too, because is that where like Wisconsin claims to be the home state of Paul Bunyan?
I think so, yeah.
Because I think there's like 7 states that do. I'm not really
Yeah.
sure. I looked into it at one point because there are people that claim that Paul Bunyan was based on somebody from Maine that was a lumberjack up in the Great North Woods of Maine. Um, and if you go to Bangor, Maine, there's a giant onion statue in the middle of the city. So I think I took a picture of it once, and I'm like the home of Paul Bunyan, and I think like Johnny L. Tenney commented on it. He's like, "Well, if you went to Wisconsin, they tell you differently." Like,
He just came from a really big family. There's like 7 of them.
and they were all named Paul.
Yeah.
There we go. And they were each given a blue ox to take them out into the world.
Well, of
So
course.
yeah, seven babes as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so this kind of is American folklore and
Mhm.
storytelling, and I think a lot of the modern day stuff gets lumped into that as well, or follows a similar pathway. into our media. Because I mean, when you're talking about the hypernormalization of it, you're talking about as portrayed in mass media, right? Like on
Hmm.
TV and stuff too.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really interesting element to it is how it gets portrayed to the masses. Because
Right.
if we go back to like, you know, did this guy because of a decade full of vampire media? Is that why he saw a vampire in the graveyard? And if you apply that to today, where everything on a ghost hunting show is a demon or like a malevolent poltergeist or something,
Yeah.
does that mean you're more likely to encounter that? And what sort of negative consequences, does that have if the potential upside is that this could otherwise, be a boundary pushing force if
Yeah.
when you encounter it, it's just a boogeyman because all you've ever consumed about it is scary stories.
Yeah. It makes me wonder. I was thinking about this recently too. If the universe needs to find ways to get your attention through weirder and weirder things,
Mhm.
the more that people come to accept the reality of these weird things, that maybe eventually it just loops around. So more mundane things become the more significant things.
You know what? I would take some mundane in my life. I feel like past 10 years been a little too off the rails for me. I'll go back to mundane any day now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm damn tired of living in interesting times. I can tell you that much. Uh,
Yeah, I never thought I'd crave boredom, but let me just be bored for a little bit, man.
yeah, I'd like to hear some political or world news and not be dejected and in pain afterwards. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, oh, the simpler times, if there ever were any.
yeah. I mean, one wonders if there ever were, but it does seem like we've really ramped up in the past couple decades to almost a point of no return. Um, we did talk a little bit before recording about how uh, we're rapidly approaching the singularity, and
Yeah.
the robots are all taking over and writing our news articles for us. And just to cover their butts, some of these media organizations are like, by the way, some of this was written by a robot, but we're not going to tell you how much or what. So, uh,
Yeah, it's wild. I was in a meeting with like our CEO is visiting our local offices when I was in the B2B space. And this is like just when Chat GPT and stuff was taking over. And one of the graphic designers was like, "Hey, do you guys ever think about like adopting this to make writing easier?" And all the writers were like, "Shut up! Don't
yeah.
put that in his head." But it's crazy. Like that was a couple years ago. Just how far it's come and how. I mean, I guess it's not surprising because you don't have to pay AI. But how willing, yeah, like a otherwise reputable news organization is to adopt this technology that like everybody knows hallucinates and makes up stuff.
Yeah, but even if it doesn't, on principle,
Yeah.
it's, yeah. Like, I think people crave authenticity, and as much as I don't really understand the form, I think like things like reels or TikTok videos and like little short form content. Um, I think that's really appealing to a lot of people, and partly because it has a feel of authenticity because you're watching somebody in their home, like they're taking a little selfie video and talking to
Mhm.
you and things like that. But it's heavily edited and chopped up and just like has a lot of effects on it and editing going on, but it's short form content for a short attention span world. But at
Mhm.
least it's people doing it, and I think people are crave authenticity in one way or another, and I don't think AI is ever going to replicate that in a way where it's an adequate replacement.
No, and that's like my silver lining hope with this whole AI uptick stuff is that maybe it'll like force people back into um I don't want to like sound totally luddite and be like off the internet entirely or out of digital spaces, but maybe it'll like reinforce some of that like shared human experiences, like
Yeah,
concerts and stuff. Maybe people will eventually learn to be a little bit more savvy towards like disinfo and things because you'll just have to
right.
know how to pick out what's an AI generated image versus an actual photograph. So maybe my hope is it'll like loop around to something good, but we're going to have to wade through some very interesting and frustrating times with it first, I fear.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, there are people saying that the AI thing is it's an AI bubble and it's going to burst at some point.
Hmm.
A lot of guys that know a lot more about tech than I do are forecasting that, but I think you could actually say the same thing about social media because uh, I'm no longer on Twitter, which kind of kills me because when I started writing, I just went on Twitter and put stuff up there, and a
Hmm.
lot of people I know were from that. But it's weird to have like a sentimentality towards any kind of social media. But now, at the time of this recording, they're talking about the imminent banning of TikTok and the recent Mark Zuckerberg has made recent changes to fact checking on the meta sites like Instagram and Facebook, where he's no longer going to do it, and um, it's causing a lot of people to leave those sites specifically because he's now saying it's okay to tell people that are gay that they have a mental disorder, like that they're pretty much explicitly saying that. Um, it's uh, I'm thinking that maybe social media itself is kind of a bubble that's going to burst, where maybe people are going to get really sick of that. And I don't know what the alternative looks like, because even if it's not in person get-togethers, there's got to be ways to connect that that are a little bit more authentic and person to person. Part of the reason I started this show, actually, I think, is just because I want to talk to people and I want to have an excuse to interview people and talk to them. But
No, I think maybe the alternative is more avenues like this, like a podcast where you can talk to somebody one on one, or go back to uh, the early internet where everybody just had their own site, or like a forum where you talk to people on it, and it's like a human being you're
right,
talking to. Um, maybe that's what comes after Internet 2.0 here. Maybe that's 3.0 is a return to um, more direct connections, even if it is still mediated through some sort of digital space where you don't know if car mechanic 101 on the forum is a real person, or like what they
right,
look like as a real person, but that they're a real person because they have to get past the AI bot check or something.
right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I have heard people suggest that bringing back like message boards and things like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think social media has broken a lot of people's brains, and certainly
Yes.
no small part of where we're at now. Um, and with that comes ways to game that system, which in
Hmm.
some cases means paying the social media company money to promote your stuff, or having to alter the way that you express yourself so that it aligns with some kind of SEO. Um,
Yeah.
I consider these to be kind of great evils of our time.
Yeah, there's a really interesting book, like 10 arguments to delete your social media right now by, I
Yeah,
want to say his name's Jaron Lanier. I don't know if you've read it or not.
no, I haven't.
Okay, good. I hate explaining things to people who already know it, so I try not to. But
Yeah, no,
no, he talks about in there what you just said is like these algorithms are really the issue. And he made a point I never realized is that like nobody knows how they work. Like Pentagon secrets will get leaked, but the source code for Facebook or Google's algorithm has never been leaked. Like these things are so lock and key, and they're obviously doing a lot of damage, and nobody really understands how they're working or what they're doing. And maybe since then, this book's probably 10 years old now. Maybe they have leaked. But it was a really interesting insight in the moment just to realize, like, wow, this thing that nobody understands like is in almost every part of my life right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty unsettling and it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, just a
And I
little
try to
spooky.
yeah, I try to be aware of it and then think that I can as long as I'm aware that there are attempts to manipulate me constantly, which is easy for me because I'm an inherently paranoid person, and my paranoia has served me well over the years. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah,
but
it's no, you need a little bit of paranoia these days, I think.
yeah, but the trouble is everybody isn't like that. So a lot of people would take at face value what they see, and they don't question it beyond that. And it's like I worry about boomer relatives when I see stuff that some of like my aunts and uncles would share or something like that. I'm like, don't, please don't share that. That's disinformation, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
and it's wild with like the obviously AI generated like images people share and things. It
yeah,
really makes you wonder like is the dead internet theory true? Are these just bots sharing bot posts or like are there actual
yeah,
people who are so like gone that they can't tell that this picture isn't real?
yeah. I mean, there are the bots sharing bot posts, and there also is AI cannibalizing itself, where it's
Hmm.
training itself off of other AIs, which is just, I don't know, it's crazy. But there's a certain tastelessness to some of it that I think is inherently human. That no machine could be that tactless, because I've seen these ones recently where it's just a picture of the only standing house left in the Palisades after the fire ripped through, and it's surrounded by burned down homes. And it's like a Christian person lived here. Isn't this a miracle? It's like, oh my god, like only a human would make that. Like that's not an AI generated thing.
Yeah, there's a certain sort of like moronic beauty to humans that the machines will probably never be able to replicate. That's like the real Turing test. Is like, is this too stupid for the machine to have come up with?
Right. I mean, that's our superpower is good old fashioned human stupidity, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Frank Zappa said that there's a certain charm to stupidity, but when you do it over and over again, it becomes tiresome.
Yeah. It's okay to like make a mistake and just like be dumb and have fun, but you can't make that your whole personality in life. You got
Right,
to have a
right.
little critical thought.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find that lacking these days, but I don't want to be too much I don't of a downer and demoting this sort of thing, because as I was saying earlier, that's what was refreshing to me about your writings is that you do have that ability to look critically at it, and this brings me to one of your other posts, which was kind of a reaction to another article that was written because I think you'll agree with me that a lot of journalists these days, and it really ever since QAnon started being a very public problem, have had to contend with a lot of new age, spiritual, paranormal, and conspiracy stuff that they're
Hmm.
not adequately prepared for at all. And there's this one article that was kind of talking about the rise of astrology and alternative healing and stuff, and kind of making fun of it. And then you
Hmm.
kind of responded by looking at this stuff through an economic lens, which I thought, that's a good example of nuance that a lot of people don't bother pursuing, you know, that you did. So I applaud you for it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really like I think the line that got me in there was she was writing that people were choosing tarot over therapy, and I was like, which one's cheaper? Like, how do you write that and then not put those
Right.
dots together? Like, there's a reason they're not going to therapy and choosing
Yeah.
something they can get off Amazon for $20 at most. And
Right.
I think a lot of it comes down to um, Yeah, the writers and sort of like people who've been out there in the media space, myself included, haven't had to engage with these topics.
Right.
They can
It was
always,
almost verboten, it's kind of like these were taboo subjects. So like it
yeah,
didn't, classically media hasn't wanted to dignify a lot of this stuff with column space, unless they're making fun of it while they're doing it. And now they have to
exactly.
contend with it, and they're still trying to make fun of it, which is just really strange.
Yeah, and more people are starting to come around to it. Partly because obviously they're seeing some benefit and some truth to it, and these people who have always not had to contend with it don't understand how something they've always viewed as being, like you said, worthy of ridicule. People are finding some form of solace in. So the default is to go back to ridicule, but then you also have like she was correct in the column that there is like a weird self-help Jordan Peterson like pipeline to alt-right thinking. And I think the problem is like you can't lump in all of this stuff with the problematic stuff, even if like
Yeah.
the lines can get blurry quick,
Hmm.
because then you're just demonizing like a whole group of people. Like she's lumping in that column like the Jordan Peterson stuff with the people who are just going on like spiritual retreats. And it's like there's those are very two different camps, I think.
Yeah, and I mean it's almost like the evangelical Christian saying that yoga is satanic or something like that.
Hmm.
Like it's lumping everything together in false equivalency, and also just a complete ignorance of the history of any of these subjects. Because when you don't deign it worthy of investigation until you feel like you have some point to make about it, how dumb it all is, uh, uh, and you're not going to know the history and know that the problematic stuff has always been there. Like
Yeah.
there has always been a direct line that you can draw from any of this stuff to deeply troubling, violent, and hateful stuff. And towing that line, needling a path through it, and unpacking the history for the fun stories or the spooky stories, or magical traditions or whatever it may be. It's always a tightrope walk, you know. Um,
Hmm.
and I think, yeah, and I mean, to your point in this article, it was kind of like a really good deconstruction of it, because it's just like, um, yeah, not everybody has time or money to get therapy or the insurance for it or an insurance
Hmm.
plan that covers it. Like there's a whole question of what the healthcare system is in this country.
Hmm.
that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, those are the questions. And like in this columnist defense, they only have so much time and so much column space, and they're
yeah,
on a singular mission. So I get it, but I think the more pertinent question is like why, if you think this is a problem, then investigate like the root of the problem.
yeah,
And I've seen it happen to like friends of mine. I've written about this before in one of my articles looking at conspiracy theory. I've known this guy for years, and then out of nowhere, he's like spouting off that Joe Biden's a lizard person and things. And it's like, where did you get this? Like, where
yeah.
is this coming from in you? You always had like a passing interest in UFOs, and now we've gone like way off the rails here. But at the same time, he's like he can't afford health care. He has bad mental health problems and can't afford therapy. He's a single dad, and along comes somebody with a worldview that's like, oh, the problem is lizard people. That's why all this stuff is affecting you, and you can't afford any of it. As where the alternative reality is like so complex and so hard to wrap your head around that like just like monkey brain is like, yeah, okay, lizard
Yeah.
people. That makes sense. That's easy to get rather than like economic forces that go back decades.
But there's an easily identifiable enemy that
Hmm.
uh, operates as an all inclusive umbrella over all of life's maladies. Is the thing. easy to
Yeah.
understand, like you said. I mean, Alan Moore had a great quote about that, about how conspiracy theories are actually more comforting than people
Yeah.
choosing to believe it, because it's a lot more comforting to believe that than to believe that we're cast adrift, completely rudderless in a ocean of chaos. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't like excuse these problematic and like sometimes very deeply troubling worldviews. But again, it's like you have to get to the source of it. And
Right.
I cite a couple of like conspiracy researchers in that article, and they're like, part of the drive behind these quote unquote ludicrous beliefs that people just want to outright mock are people looking for comfort and security and trying to understand a world that gets harder and harder every year for them.
Right.
So again, it doesn't excuse this, but if you want to root out the issue and actually solve it, you have to address what's driving people to start thinking this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I can relate to that as well. It's just, I mean, even today on my way home from work, I flipped on the news and listened to the news on the radio, and I'm thinking, projecting ahead, like what's going to be happening, what's going to happen in the next couple weeks, like what's happening with these world events right now. And then it kind of did pop into my head for just a second, like, man, this would all be a lot easier to take if I just thought that there was one guy like calling all the shots and being like, all right, we're going to move like this politician into this spot and this one into this spot, and
Hmm.
this nation's going to attack this nation and this nation's going to withdraw, like some cosmic board game of like Risk is set up, and there's a hand moving all these things around, because then I'd have somebody to be mad at,
Yeah, yeah. No, I when I was feeling very kind of down uh, after the election and stuff, I was um, something in the news had sparked it. I forget what, but I was telling my wife, I was like, you know what? I think I might be okay with a false flag that's in our favor. Like, yeah, like
Right.
give me like some actual like conspiracy, easy understand. There's like a master pulling the strings behind this because
Right.
it's like easier for the brain to default to like let somebody actually be in control of this rather than the truth of like, no, the universe is just inherently this chaotic.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny too, because you mentioned the X Files earlier, and I was watching the X Files last night for research purposes for a future episode, which that's my favorite thing about writing about and podcasting about paranormal and weird subjects, is I can watch a show like the X Files for research purposes, and say that and actually mean it. But after I watched the episode I set out to watch, I watched the one about it's basically like the whole history of the cigarette smoking man.
Hmm.
I don't know if you watched or remember this episode.
I don't think I don't think I do.
Oh, okay. Well, Frohickey of the Lone Gunman uncovers like the whole history of this guy. So it operates all as flashbacks and tells you the whole cigarette smoking man's life history. And it hits all the beats of like the
Mhm.
Kennedy assassination and like Martin Luther King's assassination, all the way up to like the present day in the show. And I'm like, this stuff all seems like quaint now. It's like really weird
Mhm.
that like an assassination of a sitting U.S. president and the attendant conspiracy theories around the JFK assassination and UFOs and like actual aliens and all this stuff. It all just kind of seems quaint because it's like the world is so nuts right now. Like
Yeah.
you can't even have a character like the cigarette smoking man lurking in the shadows and have that be believable in any real way. It's going to be way more nuts than that because people wouldn't buy it now.
Yeah, it's all it's almost like just a feedback loop that keeps getting more and more and more intense. Um yeah, it's like how do you even like satirize this stuff? Like God bless the people over at the Onion for still finding a way to put a spin on it, but like how do you
Yeah,
get how do you get more kind of off the rails and what's actually going on in real life?
yeah. I mean, it's a good question. You have to wonder if satire is dead at this point because it's difficult to do satire when
Hmm.
yeah when your subject is completely nuts and and people don't understand it anymore anyway. I mean, I guess isn't so much for nuance these days. Um, People getting the joke. I'm depressing myself here. We don't want that. Um,
Well, maybe it's that, like the AI stuff, maybe it loops back around. Maybe it gets so ludicrous that the only way you can move forward is back to the mundane. Because people have to get burnt out on it sometime, right? Hopefully.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would assume so. And uh, I actually really appreciate mundane weirdness. And
Hmm.
I don't think people. Um, it's a pretty easy way to re-enchant your world is when you start just noticing little things. So
Oh yeah, that's the whole drive behind like my interest in folklore and stuff. I mean, go back to the beginning of the conversation with like some of these stories. Half their foot is in reality. Like you can go to the literal place some guy saw a vampire. You can't
yeah,
do that. You can't go to a location in a Stephen King book and go see it, but you can go see
right,
where a police officer saw in real life a vampire, quote unquote. And yeah,
yeah,
there's a certain beauty to that aspect of it, like you said, the mundane weirdness of every other point in time, this cemetery is just a cemetery. But for one moment on one night, it was home to a vampire.
yeah. That's a really cool way to think about it. Although, if the vampire's in the cemetery and there's no policeman there to shine a flashlight in it, can we say that the vampire wasn't there?
I would like to think he's there, and I would like to think he makes a sound if he falls over.
Yeah, I would like to think that too. Or when he flutters his cape as he jumps over the fence.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the more incredible part of the story now that I think about it. How did that cape not get caught on the barbed wire?
yeah, I mean that's a damn good question.
That's the real mystery here.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're talking about like symbols and meaning behind things, like the fence is like a really cool kind of like a barbed wire fence around a cemetery, and somebody leaping over it is kind of a cool like metaphorical
Mhm.
symbol. It's that liminality thing, the division point boundary between uh, you know the realm of the dead and the world outside. It's kind of
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of it that way. Yeah, you're right.
it's very
Yeah, and the
poetic.
and the
Yeah.
vampire being an undead, half alive, half corpse. Yeah, you got
Right.
something there. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, because yeah, I mean, well, that's what I was getting at with your writing is I think that there is a lot of different lenses through which you can look at this stuff that you're already exploring. To be clear, because I don't know that we established a timeline. When did you establish Driftless Times Media and your Substack?
It was May of 2024.
Okay,
Yeah, because I got
so you're not
I
even
got
a year in.
no, I'm still fresh.
Okay, yeah. So I don't want to. Yeah, well, that's good for me to know because I'm like, oh wait, has he been doing this for longer than I thought? I don't want to make it sell it short, but yeah, no, I mean that's an impressive amount of interesting things to have up for a short period of time,
Thank you.
relatively short period of time, because uh, I got really down on myself for a while for the amount of writing that I did, and I had to like push myself to get like one thing a month out for a while. But yeah, no, you've got a significant amount for that time period. Um, and speaking of lenses for things, I found really interesting the recent article you did about the Manhattan UFO abduction series that was on Netflix. because really what you're talking about in it is the use of color and lighting
Hmm.
as the show goes, and how that kind of literally and figuratively colors our expectations and conclusions when we're hearing the story. I don't know if you want to get into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this was really the that film theory minor I talked about earlier coming into play. Always looking for an opportunity to put my school loan money to use. But
Yeah,
no, it got brought up on an episode of Tim Binnall's podcast I was listening
yeah,
to, and I didn't have like this documentary on my radar at all. And then they mentioned on there, like, oh, the lighting in this is really weird. And that perked up that film theory part of my brain and said, like, oh, a director or something making like a weird lighting choice in a movie. I can get into that. So yeah,
yeah,
I went into that and yeah, it's some really interesting kind of fun choices they made with it. The beauty of film theory with that's like this stuff, the paranormal folklore stuff, is that maybe this wasn't the director's intention at all, and it was a happy accident. But it sure seems, to my eye, like there are definitely some intentional choices made here to kind of let you know what they were thinking. Because essentially the documentary is oh, why can't I think of their name? Carol Rainey and Linda.
yeah. Linda, I always want to say Napolitano because that was her name in the original accounts. They used a fake name for her. I think that was the fake name Napolitano, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but those two kind of pitted against each other in a essentially this abduction story actually happened versus Carol's side, which is I don't think they're telling the truth so much.
right,
And both of them kind of get cast in Linda blue, Carol orange, but then those colors get utilized throughout the documentary in really interesting ways. Um, that I'm saying is maybe the director's letting you know which side their feelings about this story lie, because they to their credit they present it in a really neutral, just kind of fact based way. But then if you look
right.
at it through the way they're using color, um, there's like a shot that I didn't include in the article, but if you look when Carol is at, I think, a deck of monitors, either at a computer or she's like rewatching the film. Above her head is a blueprint that's done in orange ink. So it's orange ink on blue paper, and it's of a bridge, which is, a STEM engineering hard scientific reality thing over this color that of blue, which the filmmakers are utilizing for Linda's side of the story, which is paranormal. So I found like that choice is really interesting just in and of itself, because you have the STEM engineering hard material done purposely in this orange ink over a blue paper. And that's just one of like the bunch of little details if you look in the documentary where they're kind of pitting these two colors against each other, and one color, Carol's orange, is always really kind of coming out on top.
Yeah, and I mean they are completely opposite each other on the spectrum of colors too.
Hmm.
So they couldn't contrast any more than they do. Um, and uh, yeah, that I mean this is an extremely interesting way to look at this stuff because we're talking about I I guess the best way to call it would be an infamous UFO
Hmm.
story. I remember talking about this briefly online at one point, just posting something about the case, and it just inspired this huge thread of people not even really necessarily arguing with each other, but it's like this is a case that people have very strong feelings about.
Hmm.
I mean, Carol Rainey in particular, and she passed away a few years ago, or was it last year? I think it might have been more recent, but um, yeah, she obviously lived long enough to be in this documentary and then passed away before it was released. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a contentious one, so it's kind of interesting to have that contrast. And it's certainly interesting to have the visual examples that you have as you're describing it throughout the article you wrote.
Thank you.
Is
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say it's like aesthetic choices that are subliminally kind of influencing the viewer's reception of it, whether or not that was intended by the filmmakers, because you can't
Mhm.
say either way. But you kind of feel like they probably were trying to lead the audience one way or another.
One of the really defining lessons that one of my film professors kind of imparted was that everything you see in the screen in like a good movie was done with purpose. So even if you think like a background detail or something was just, a happy accident, they chose to leave it in for some reason.
Yeah,
So when you approach, like a critical analysis of a movie or a documentary in this case, just start coming at it from that question, like, why these color choices? Why are they using them this way? They could have done anything, in this scene, this framing, this lighting, but somebody made a deliberate decision to portray this in this way. So why did they do that? And that's where the fun of, like film analysis comes in, is trying
right.
to understand why a director or a cinematographer shoots something in a certain way. But especially in a documentary like this, like these are real people, real stories, so it has that extra layer to it.
Yeah, and uh, I thought it was cool looking, and I mean that might just
Hmm.
be the reason that they did these things is because it looks cool.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
might just be that simple, but it is really cool to pull it apart and really analyze it critically the way that you did. One thing I thought was funny is the way they portrayed Peter Robbins, because I mean I've seen Peter Robbins in real life uh, at like UFO festivals and things.
Hmm.
Um, and they've got him kind of, he looks like somewhere between a film noir like PI sitting in his office waiting for a case, like some dame to wander in with a case for him,
Hmm.
and like kind of like an MIB almost character. It's really weird the way he's kind of dressed up and lit with in kind of like a dark room almost, and
Yeah.
yeah, and he's got kind of the blue hues as well on him.
Yeah,
So
they were definitely having fun um with the way they were shooting him. And I was curious watching it because he's got like that really big hat on, which I kind of loved.
yeah,
I was like, is that like a costume choice? They gave that to him? Or is that his
well, I feel like it had to have been because, like I said, I've seen
hat?
him in real life before. I don't think he always wears a hat like that. And it was just kind of a really weird choice. I mean, maybe he does, but and maybe I just go to UFO festivals in the summer when it's really hot and it's not ideal to wear a hat. But
Right. Yeah, yeah, it goes back to that, like they're real people, and if this is like you're putting them in a costume, like I don't know, not that it's a ethical thing or something, but it does make you wonder, like, did you have to give him a silly hat?
yeah, yeah, and I mean, I feel like some of this stuff, like I tend to be kind of a nerd about it and like to learn these little things, like the inside baseball of production. But sometimes I wish I didn't, because you're kind of happier not knowing how much choice goes into it.
Yeah, that's the one thing they warn you when you start getting like really nerdy into these subjects. Is it like you can never really just enjoy a movie again the same way? I
Right.
would I went to go see Nosferatu like the day after I published that, and just the whole time I'm watching that movie, I'm like, I wonder why they're dressed in that color. I just couldn't. My brain had
Oh
been
yeah.
so hardwired by doing this. It was like, huh, she's always wearing white. That's weird. It's like, no, just
Yeah.
watch the movie and enjoy it.
Right. Well, I like to think I could turn it off. I think at my best I can, but I feel like whenever I'm watching a movie, kind of to your point earlier with the vampire movies of the '70s, I'm always looking for some kind of connection to, uh, I don't know, like paranormal or occults or Fortean lore, and so I'm making these connections in my mind or making mental notes about it while I'm watching it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, you're better off not knowing some of the tricks because it's almost like knowing how a magic trick is done. and it never seems magical after that because you know how it's done already.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like good skills to have when you're watching like a David Lynch movie. But if I'm
Right.
just watching like, Friday the 13th or something, I don't need to, have my brain trying to analyze the framing of Jason.
Although, I mean, I think there were some pretty good artistic shots in Jason 8. You know,
Oh, which one is that one? We just binge
this
watched
Jason
all of
Takes
them for
Manhattan.
Halloween. Yes, that's my favorite one for all the
Mine too.
wrong reasons.
Yeah, it's terrible. Uh, I let my
Oh,
son watch that when he was probably way too young, but I was like, all right, you want to watch a Jason movie? Jason Takes Manhattan. That's the way to go.
and he spends like 3/4 of the movie on a boat, and he's in Manhattan for like 30 minutes of it.
It is good stuff, though. Yeah. All right. Well, we are getting close to my self-imposed time limits here, um, but this really has been a blast. It's great to actually kind of meet new people, and it's like I said, when you've been at this since last year, and as soon as you popped up as I actually don't know how we connected, if you followed me or I followed you, but I think Instagram was how I discovered your writing, and I'm very happy that I did because I think it's all very interesting stuff that people should go check out. So, were they to do that, how should they go about it?
Yeah. The easiest way is driftlesstimesmedia.com. From there, you can get to the newsletter, which we put out on Substack, because I figure people are just really familiar with how Substack works as a newsletter delivery system. So that's why we kind of broke it up into two separate entities there. But if you go in Substack, you look up Driftless Times Media or the name of the newsletter, the sidebar, you can find it there. Otherwise, driftlesstimesmedia.com. It's got the links to everywhere we're at on the interwebs.
All right, beautiful. Yeah, and I really do recommend this to people because you won't be mad about it. It's not gonna waste your time. It's quality writing and some interesting ideas to explore that you don't see just everywhere. So, Walker, it's a pleasure to actually meet you and talk with you a bit. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've had a blast.
All right, beautiful. We'll talk soon.